to say thank you, right? You always got to say thank you. So I'm really grateful that I'm here today to have the opportunity to share my story with you, okay? Stories are very powerful. How many of you like stories? How many of you think stories can change the world? Yeah? How many of you have a favorite story? How many of you have done or been exposed to what they call narrative therapy? What, anything? Not that many of you. So this is how powerful stories are. There's actually a branch of therapy called narrative therapy where we help our clients rewrite their story, right? You can't go back and change the past, but you can change your view of the past, your perspective. So it goes into all about how you think about what happened will determine partially the outcome of what happened. So stories are very powerful. And so because of that, I don't use PowerPoints, I don't use pictures, all that stuff's out there on the Ella Foundation. If you want it, we're really easy to find. Type in the Ella Foundation, right? I know y'all know how to use the internet now. And you'll find this everywhere. So I'm also going to tell you that be kind. It's been about 4 years since I've done a presentation. I gave birth to a child 4 years ago who's very high maintenance. But I'm getting back into it, so if I'm rusty, bear with me. One last thing, couple last things before I really get into the story. We only have a limited amount of time here, and there is no easy way to tell you everything about my story, right? And you're probably going to have a lot of questions. So write them down. I will give everybody a chance to ask questions at the end of the presentation. And then if for whatever reason you still have more questions or you want to know more, you can always email me and I will, email you back. Does anybody have a problem with cussing?
No.
Because it's all right. The story that I'm going to tell you is offensive. It's graphic. It's heartbreaking. And it's just really fucked up. Really, really fucked up. If you need a break, please take one, okay? Seriously, get up, walk out. I've had people do it before. It can be a bit much sometimes. It won't be a problem. If you need to cry, go for it. I got Kleenex, right? I'll share. I know I'm going to. I always do. And it's been a really long time since some of these things have happened. So that's fine. If you get mad, good. Good for you. It should. It should make you mad. It means that you're human, right? Because if you hear what I'm about to tell you and you don't get mad, something's wrong with you and you need to call me for counseling. If you can relate, even better. That means that you have some empathy, right? And empathy will serve you very well in both your life and your career. How many here of you are criminal justice students? How many of y'all plan to go into law enforcement? How many of you plan to go into the law? How many of you plan to go into counseling? Ooh, touchy-feely people, yay! Y'all are with me? Okay, so empathy will help you, right? Even in law enforcement and any of the fields on the other side of the fence, as I call them, right? You've got your victim side and your inmate side. But so for those of you going on to that side, the empathy will serve you well, right? And we're going to get into more about why that will help you later. By the time you walk away from here, I hope what you walk away with is hope, right? Because when violence happens, hope is the only thing you have left in some cases. And so I hope you walk away with hope. And I hope that you walk away with the desire to take all this shit life throws at you, right? And to plant tulips in it. It's like a motto of mine. You're going to give me some shit? Fine, I'm going to plant some tulips. We're going to make something good. I hope you have the desire to take all the pain that you have personally endured, and I would imagine that all of you have endured some pain, and all the pain that you will vicariously go through in choosing to go into the field that you have, and that you will let it mold you, right, into being a good person, a wise person. Because violence and these topics that we're going to talk about, they can do one of two things to you. They can warp you, right? They can make you cynical. They can make you jaded. I've seen it over and over and over with the people that I work with. Or it can do the exact opposite. It can make you the best person that you ever could have been. It can make you wise beyond your years and give you an inner sense of peace and groundedness that you did not know was possible if you face it head on, right? There are some really good things that come with violence. There are much better ways to get there, but it's possible. Okay, so here we go. You've been warned. So my name, obviously, is Charity Lee. That's just one of the many things I've been called in my life, right? Currently, my title is, as Stephanie said, the founder and the director of the Ella Foundation. We're a 501c3 based in Texas and Georgia, but we've done work nationwide and internationally. Our mission is to prevent violence and to advocate for human rights through education, criminal justice reform, and victim advocacy. Ella works with anyone affected by crime. I have a little catchphrase that I tell our volunteers and the people that I'm trying to convince to give us money, that it does not matter to Ella what side of the crime scene tape somebody comes from, right? We will take anybody. I work with inmates, and I work with victims, and I work with families of inmates and families of victims. I don't discriminate, and as I go on, you'll understand better why. So I'm also the mother of 3 children, right, with really unique personalities, to say the least. I have a 23-year-old son named Paris Lee. I have a daughter named Ella, who is dead. And I have a 3-year-old son named Phoenix Trinity Lee, who is currently jumping on a trampoline, according to the last picture I got. So I'm also called Mom, Mommy, Mama, and more recently Talking Tissue, because that is how Phoenix calls me over to rub his nose on my leg. He says, hey, come here, Talking Tissue, I need you. And then he wipes boogers all over me, so that's a new one. I've also been called the daughter of a murder victim, and the daughter of an acquitted murderer, and the mother of a murdered child, and the mother of a murderer. I have been called a victim. I have been called a survivor. I have been called the spawn of evil. I have been called the spawner of evil. I have been called a miracle. I have been called a demon. And I have been called an angel. Honestly, I prefer Charity, right? Or Mom. Or just for somebody to recognize that I'm just a human, right? I'm just a human being. And I'm trying my best to get through, to survive, and to thrive in what I choose to call the beautiful nightmare of life, right? Because life is beautiful, but life is beautiful. And we're all just are trying to get through it. I was born on October 26, 1973. That means I'm 43 years old. And I was born in Marietta, Georgia, which at the time was a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. I was born into a middle upper class family. We lived at the country club, the Atlanta Country Club. My parents drove Rolls Royces, Mercedes, respectively. We were well off. There was no reason from most people's point of view, that we did not have access to everything that we needed access to. My mom was in her early 20s when I was born, and my dad was in his late 20s, early 30s. My father's name was James Robert Bennett Jr. Everybody called him Bobby. He came from a family of 4 kids, 2 parents, okay? He was a mechanical genius, from what I've been told. He was a criminal, he was a womanizer, and he was a drug addict. And I remember loving him very much. His mother, so my grandmother, was an alcoholic. His father was also a criminal. His sister committed suicide. His other brother, one brother, was murdered either a year before or a year after my father was murdered, in 1981. Of that family, only one brother survives, my uncle. My mother's name is Kyla Bennett. My mother is an expert at 3 things only: making lots and lots of money, manipulating people very well, not always for bad, but manipulating people very well, and she's like almost impossible to figure out. And I remember loving my mother fiercely. My mother was my world growing up. She came from a family of 2 kids, 2 parents, kinda, sorta. Things are gonna start to get a little more complicated here. So my grandmother, right, her mother, was much older than my grandfather, and she had 2 relationships from a previous, or 2 kids from previous relationships. My grandfather took care of everybody, right? He was the caretaker. We're a very matriarchal family. We're very much dominated by women, and everything kind of runs to the women. And my grandfather was the steady one. He was the rock, the caretaker growing up. His parents were alcoholics, okay? He was cared for mostly by some aunts of his, right? This is the early, late 1800s, early 1900s. Early 1900s. He became a medic, right, on the battlefields of France during World War II. Then he came home from the war, never talked about it, right? Occasionally you'd kind of get a glimpse into some of what he saw. Not enough. It led me to really enjoy World War II history, because my grandfather would start these stories, be like, I remember one day on the battlefield, and you'd be like, what? You're like, no, I don't want to talk about that. You're like, fine, I'll go read about the battlefield. But he had his own things, his own issues going on. He met my grandmother, who, like I said, was 13 years older, much older. Married her in her very unconventional ways, and stayed with her until she died, which was about 40-something years later, okay? After she died, he fell into a major depression, and died pretty much disconnected from all of us. My grandmother, she was a character in her own right? She was definitely a free thinker. I think she was born in 1910. We're not sure. She lied about her age so many times. We're not really sure how old she was, but she was a product of the early 1900s. And she did not conform at all. She did whatever the hell she wanted to. She left home at 12, hitchhiked across the country. She had 2 children before my grandfather, and she had those children with men outside of her race, which, as you can well imagine, in the early 1900s, this was frowned upon, right? She was involved in a relationship with a Native American, and then with a migrant sheep shearer from Mexico, okay? The first relationship produced a daughter, my Aunt Joanne, and I only met her once because she lived in Alaska. Evidently, just a little family story, She moved to Alaska after my grandparents got married because my grandparents met one another when my grandfather came over to pick up Joanne for a date, and then somehow he married my grandmother. So Joanne moved to Alaska. Okay? That's the only thing I know about the story. Joanne got married. She had 2 sons, one of whom committed a drug-related murder and was incarcerated for life in Alaska. The other one died of brain cancer. My other aunt, Jose, who is the daughter of the Mexican migrant worker, the family story about that relationship is that he left my grandmother while she was in labor in a tent somewhere in a field, and somebody had to come and get her. I don't really know everything that went on there, but my Aunt Jose, in her lifetime, she experienced drug addiction, incarceration, domestic violence, mental health issues, blah, 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 blah. This list goes on. Okay, so, to regroup. My mom, my aunt, Sammy Jean is her other sister, that's the last one. She's just as messed up as all the rest of everybody, right? Multiple marriages, mental health issues, some serious anger issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Everybody following along so far? Y'all are probably like, what is all this? But we're going to get into it. My mother and father met when my mother was 16. My mom has told me that it was love at first sight, right? At least on her part. So how did they meet? Well, in keeping with family tradition, my father was married to my Aunt Jose, and he met my mother, and then at some point, they got divorced. He married my mama, and here I am. I don't know how all that worked. Nobody really talks about it a whole lot, but here I am. So I am my father's second child, my mother's first child. I have an older half-brother by my father, and I have a sister who is 26 years younger than me by my mother. She's 17 now. The memories I have of my childhood are negative. Hardly any good memories. Some of the memories are very clear, right? Others I just get glimpses of, but no context of events to place them in, right? Just like these snapshots that go off in my head. They're triggered by certain things, or you don't know when they're gonna pop up. Yeah, it's like seeing like a snapshot of your life, and you know you were there, right? Like it feels real, right? As real as a memory can feel, but you don't know how you got there, and you have no idea how you got away, but you must have, because I'm here. But they're all negative, mostly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of tell you what I remember in chronological order, as best I can, okay? The first thing I remember from my childhood is hiding. That is the strongest memory I have of childhood. Hiding. Hiding in the garage when I was around 3 or 4 years old. I loved it. My father, like I said, drove a Rolls Royce. And I would go and I would climb into that car and I would curl up in a little ball, and I would just stay there until somebody came and found me. I would ignore people if they called me. I felt safe there. It was dark. I don't know why, but I love the smell of the leather. I felt safe, right? And if you ever doubt that our childhood shapes our present, don't. Because even now, when I get really, really stressed out, I have to go get in my car, which always has really nice leather, and go for really long drives. It is still only in a car that I feel safe, right? So that's my first memory of childhood, hiding to feel safe. Also, from the time I was around 3 or so, I remember my half-brother trying to persuade me to put his penis in my mouth and not wanting to do so. I was afraid, right? I can still see the room and feel the fear and the desperation to get out of there. I don't remember. I have this one image in my mind that I can't get out. I don't remember what I did that day. I don't know if I said, no, or if I didn't. If I gave my brother a blowjob at 4 years old. I don't know. That's not how memory works, right? I know I told my mom. Nothing happened. I asked her later, when I got older, do you remember me telling you this? And she was like, oh yeah. And we were just having a conversation about, oh, do you remember we went shopping that day? She's like, oh yeah, you told me that. I said, well, what did you do? You know, because if one of my kids came to me and said, hey, my brother just tried to make me, I'd be like, oh, it is on. And she said, oh, I don't know, I think I talked to your dad. Do you think you talked to my dad? Anyway, she can't remember, right? She had a pattern of not doing anything about anything. This is what I do know. If I didn't put his penis in my mouth then, I'm pretty sure I did at some point. Because I have displayed as an adult, thankfully not anymore, after years and years of therapy, every single characteristic of a victim of childhood sexual abuse that is possible, right? Hypersexuality, lack of intimacy, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, anger issues, I mean, you name it. Self-mutilation, suicide, unhealthy relationships. I mean, we can go down the list, right? They were all there. It's a struggle that goes on today, but now the most obvious symptom left, I guess, is, you know, it's really hard for me to trust people, especially guys, right? I remember one time when I was 5 years old catching caterpillars. How many of you grew up in the South? That's it? Anyone grew up in the South? Y'all are totally missing out. Okay, well, in the South, I don't know if they have them other places because I've been in the South my whole life, but in the South, used to have, not so much anymore, these fuzzy caterpillars, right, that would come out. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And they'd be like everywhere, right? And then, you know, they cocoon, and they're like these little brown fuzzy ones, and they're just really fun to pick up when you're a kid. Anyway, y'all are like, what? Anyway, all these caterpillars. I spent so much time collecting these caterpillars and putting them in this coffee can and like putting little holes in there so they could breathe. And I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I just really loved caterpillars. So I put them on the back porch. Woke up the next day. Came outside in my nightgown to check on them, right? And somehow, these caterpillars had figured out how to get free, right? They had escaped. They were everywhere. They were clinging to the screens of the back porch. And some of them had started cocoons. And I don't know why, but I still remember that on that day, for the very first time, it hit me that life was both amazing and painful. There was something about those caterpillars that touched something in me. You know, even I think that small children are much more open to the what's the word? Small children are just much more open, right? They're able to just see something and they don't judge or second guess it. They just feel it, right? And at that moment, I just felt, looking at those caterpillars, that I was witnessing something that was both tragic and beautiful. And for some reason, over the years, coming back to that memory, it strikes me as the first time that I realized that this is how my life was, tragic and beautiful. And I also saw something else on that day, but I don't think I ascribed this meaning to it on that day, but since then, that those caterpillars taught me something that I needed to learn, because I was going to have to use this lesson over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to stand here today. They taught me in their need to be free and in their ability to transform that even when trapped, you can always find a way to break free and transform into something fleetingly beautiful, right? I remember it being the first metaphor I must have experienced because it was very metaphorical. The next thing I remember, age 6, is when my mom told me that my dad was dead. I was staying at my grandparents' house in North Carolina, and I remember that she flew to see me. I remember that she told me someone had hurt my dad, and she may have even told me that he had been shot. And what I told her was, I'm glad it wasn't you. And then she flew home to Georgia. She was gone for 6 months. I had no idea what was happening, right? I did not know what any of it meant. I didn't go to my dad's funeral, so it wasn't really real, right? It was just one day I was 6 and I had this brother and I had these caterpillars, but I thought that life was normal, right, for lack of a better word. And then both parents gone, just gone. Then I remember one day my mom called me and she was crying. And I remember asking her, can I please come home now? And she said yes, I could come home now. And that was the very, very, very last happy memory that I had of childhood. The day that my mom told me I could come home. Because the woman that I came home to, she was my mom, but she was not my mom. I did not find out until much later, 2nd grade, why my mom disappeared when I was 6. I found out one day because I started a new school and was involved in that, terrible ordeal on that first day at a new school of trying to figure out where the hell you're going to sit and who you're going to sit with, because it determines your whole fate as a child who you make friends with on that first day of school, right? It's some serious stuff. So I'm looking for a place to sit, and there's a group of girls. And they look like cool girls, they look like the popular girls, whatever. That should have warned me off right there, if they make them popular girls. But I was like, can I sit down with you? And they said, no, you can't sit with us. They said, you can't sit with us because your mom's a murderer. She had your dad killed. She killed your dad. Well, this was the first I ever heard of that. I knew my dad was dead. I knew my dad had been killed. But I did not know until that day that my mother had been arrested, investigated, charged with, and acquitted of first-degree murder. it is believed by some that she hired a killer, contract killer, to execute my father. He was shot 7 times, 3 times frontally, 3 times in the back running away, and then 1 time a shot in the base of the head, just to make sure. And they said that my mom had done that. Needless to say, I didn't know what to think. Here was this woman that I adored, that I worshipped. But I knew she was gone for a while, right? She verified that this was the case, but that was pretty much the only time she ever talked about it after that again. So it just set off this whole chain of thoughts in my head, right? You think you know your life. You think you know the people around you, but do you really? There's probably people in here right now who have something in their past that they would go to great lengths to make sure nobody ever found out. Right? Do you really know the people around you? I started thinking these thoughts, right, from 2nd grade. And from that time on, I've never stopped thinking these thoughts. How do we really know the people around us? How well do we really know? How can you tell if something's going to happen, right? So what I remember the most from ages 16 to 13, I'm not going to go into huge detail, but I remember feeling like I lived with a mom who might have loved me. Still not real sure if she did or not when I was little. But I was pretty convinced that she really did not like me, right? And that's a really hard feeling to grow up with as a child. Your parent or parents is supposed to be the one who does love you. And so when you think your own parent doesn't like you or love you, it really does a number on your development, right? You do not develop confidently or in a healthy fashion. I remember feeling like I was constantly a third wheel. My mom's been married, I think she's working on her 8th or 9th divorce right now. She's been married a lot. So I always felt like a third wheel to her work. She's very wealthy now. She worked all the time. Her men, her life, her needs, her wants, her desires. It was all about her, right? I remember feeling like I was never good enough, right? In spite of the fact that I was obviously very intelligent, I was accomplished, I was a cute kid, I think. But nothing was good. I was never, ever as good as my mother. And I was never, ever going to be as good as my mother. That was the message I grew up with. I have this really distinct memory from being 10 years old of looking at my mom. I don't remember what she was doing, but I remember we were in her bathroom and looking at my mom and just knowing, like having this flash of intuition. Maybe that's what kids are good at, intuition, right? We as adults, we tend to discount our intuition. We think it away. Kids don't. I looked at my mom and I had this gut feeling that she was just surrounded by this huge wall that I was never going to get over, and that she was permanently going to be stuck in, right? She had imprisoned herself in this, what she felt was a protective wall. But I tried, right? I'm an overachiever, classic type A personality. I tried to get through that damn wall. I was like a little, by any means necessary, revolutionary to get through this woman's wall. I was going to make my mom see me. I came up with so many plans. And, looking back on them, it's fairly obvious that these plans were the result of a very immature and damaged mind, right? Because looking back on some of the stuff I did now, I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding? But, it is what it is. I tried being perfect, right? Got nothing but A's and B's. And the acceptable D in geography because I hate it. Like I was like, whatever, I'll take a 3 point. I got great grades. I skipped the 10th grade, right? I played soccer. I played sports. I did gymnastics. I did ballet, right? Like I was the poster child of upper middle class white family, right? And I did it. It was great. That didn't work. I brought home an A on a math test. My mom was like, well, I always got A pluses. I'm like, fine. I brought home, Mom, I won the soccer game today. Well, that's cool. I coached the whole team to the world championship divisions. It's like, okay, whatever. There was always a one-upmanship. It was never good enough. So I was like, okay, fine, that didn't work. I was going to be really, really bad. Really bad. Like super bad. I read this book to my 3-year-old right now called Hattie the Bad, right? About this little girl who's like, she starts out good, and then she realizes she gets some attention for being good, but everybody's kind of like, they take it for granted. Like, oh, Hattie's so good. So Hattie decides to start being bad. And everybody pays attention, right? But it's not really good attention. And so then Hattie decides later on, okay, you gotta find the balance between bad and good, right? So I tried bad. I started drinking and doing drugs when I was 11. Now remember, all the bad stuff was happening at the same time as all the good stuff. I was like living this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of lifestyle to get the woman to pay attention. I became sexually active at the age of 13. I got a couple of STDs, nothing permanent, thank God. I had an abortion once. At one point, I was so bad that my mother, the one time that she did intervene, and I will let you judge the healthiness or effectiveness of the intervention yourself, but at one time I was so bad that my mother threw me in my room and put a padlock on my door, locked me in there for 3 days, and then removed me to put me at military school. Still, I wanted to be home. In spite of how bad it was at home, all I wanted to be was at home. So I did whatever it took to get kicked out of military school. And let me tell you, that's all you got to do a lot to get kicked out of military school, right? That's where they go to reform you. But I got kicked out. By the time I was 17, I had been doing so many drugs that I was strung out on heroin. I weighed about 90 pounds. I almost lost my left arm. I had an abscess on it. Anybody ever seen an abscess in your line of work? Working with junkies? Had an abscess on it that almost had it amputated. My mother took me to the doctor and got me some antibiotics and then turned me loose again, knowing full well what I was doing. Finally, when I was 17, I came home and I begged my mother, please put me in treatment. I am going to die. I know it. I told her, because she didn't want to help me, I told her that if she didn't help me, she was going to be responsible for both giving me life and taking it, because I was begging for help. And she was like, you're just going through a phase. My arm almost fell off. I hadn't taken a crap in a month. I weighed 90 pounds. This was not a phase, right? This was serious drug addiction. It needed to be treated. Anyway, finally convinced her. So she took me to a treatment center in Tennessee. A little hole in the wall, run by the state. And it was rough. And I was 17, so I was still a minor, right? She told them, because she still had the ability to make these decisions until I turned 18, she said, don't give her anything for detox. Let her detox cold turkey, right? Let her see what it's like. So I did. I detoxed cold turkey at 17. I remember waking up in a straitjacket, and when they took the straitjacket off, I remember having almost no skin on my arms from where I had been trying to peel the skin off because it hurt so bad. I had given birth to 3 children. I would rather give birth to Siamese twin elephants co-joined at the hips without an epidural than ever go through detox like that again. She also told them if I couldn't hack it and I left, just to call the cops because she was done with me. Right, she was done. I detoxed. I stayed sober for a little while. I relapsed. But this time I relapsed on shooting cocaine because in my immature and damaged mind, I reasoned if you don't shoot heroin, it's something different. You're not an addict, right? That didn't go real well. Finally, by the time I was 18, I got it, okay? I got sober. I realized nothing. You can't do anything. And I got sober. And everybody told me, people kept telling me, get sober, get sober, get sober, get sober. Your life will get better when you get sober. But why do we get fucked up in the first place? Because our life is not good, right? So I had this idea that if I got sober, it would be great. And it wasn't. I hated it. Instead of being emotionally traumatized and damaged and high, or at least you had some pleasurable sensations, minus the abscesses and not being able to use the bathroom and weighing 90 pounds, when you're sober, all you had was the pain, right? And it felt like at the time that there was no person or therapist or anybody that could take all that from me. You're talking about years of childhood sexual abuse, psychological abuse by your mother. My mother, I forgot to mention, has been a, constant and repetitive victim of domestic violence. So watching your mother get beaten and, my life was violence, and just not doing the drugs was not going to make it better. But I thought it would. So after I'd been sober for a year, I hated it. I was miserable, right? And so I decided, I'm done with this. If this is what life is, because up until that time, I did not know that life could be anything else other than painful. I thought, if this is what life is, I'm done. Screw this, right? So I said, because I'm type A, and I feel like you have to give it all your best shot. I'm like, 3 more months. I'm going to give sobriety 3 more months. And if I am not happy, whatever happy is, at 3 months, I'm going to go buy a bunch of heroin and I'm going to kill myself. Okay? Even had the date on my calendar. 3 weeks before my death date, I found out that I was pregnant with my son, Paris, 23-year-old, right? How many of you have kids? How about you? Changes everything. And it's not all roses, but it changes everything. Or at least it does for most people, not everybody. But I found out that I was pregnant. And I decided to name him Paris. I named him Paris after, how many of you like Greek mythology? Anybody? I named him Paris after Prince Paris of Troy, right? For those of you who are not familiar with the story, Prince Paris is the reason that the Trojan War started, because he either, he came He took Helen, which was another man's wife, who also happened to be the most beautiful woman in the world at the time, supposedly. And, he abducted her, and it started this whole Trojan War. Well, the way that this came about is Paris was supposed to have been the most beautiful mortal to have ever lived up until this time, right? And these three goddesses decided that they were having this kind of bitch fit amongst themselves, as the goddesses often did. And they were trying to decide which of the three was the most beautiful, right? It was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Hera, the queen of the gods, Zeus's wife, who symbolized and was the goddess of home and hearth, family, right? And they're all bribing Paris and everything. Well, long story short, Paris chooses Aphrodite. Paris chose love, right? And so because I love metaphor and symbolism, I thought, I'm going to name him Paris. Because Paris chose love over wisdom, over war, over family, he chose love. And I always want my child to let love guide his path, right? I was 19, stupid, and, like it's your first baby, and you have all these hopes, and so he got named Paris. But immediately, like I said, everything changed. I had a reason, I had a purpose, I had something to look forward to, right? Paris literally saved my life. If I had not found out that I was having Paris, I would not be alive today. I know it. 13 years later, Paris literally destroyed my life when he gained sexual satisfaction on the beating, torturing, and stabbing to death of his little sister Ella, who was born when he was 9 years old. Didn't expect that, did you? Neither did I. So my baby, right, my Paris, the boy I hoped would always choose love as his guide, when he was 13 years old, beat his little sister for a while, then tried strangling his little sister to death for a while, and when he decided that that was taking too long and Ella was suffering too much, she stabbed her 17 times. But it was more like torture, according to what the DA's office tells me, because of how he stabbed her. She did not die for about 20 minutes. He has been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and is very much deviant in his sexual views, right? He is what I would call, a sadist. He enjoys seeing people suffer. Now, Paris, and we're going to get more into this, right? Like, why did I tell you all that history? Where did Paris come from? Paris came from all this history, right? Paris is a direct descendant of alcoholics, addicts, criminals, people with mental health issues, right? He is the perfect genetic cocktail, right? Tapped straight from the family tree that somehow got mixed together just right in this combination of nature versus nurture to produce probably the most dangerous and deviant member of our family yet, right? that I know of from our history. So now I'm gonna back up. I wish I could tell you that just because I had Paris, right, that I got pregnant, that everything was like magically better. That's not how it works, right? I tried. Because the one thing I had for Paris, and I still have for Paris, was love. This deep, fierce, protective love. When I held Paris for the first time, it dawned on me, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Whoa. And this is like a real baby in my arms. I did a talk earlier and I told that group, I was like, I have this picture of me at 19 years old and they hand Paris to me and I have this look on my face like, oh shit. Like, oh my God, this is so real. And it dawned on me, I don't know how to be a mom, right? I have a terrible mother. Terrible mother. To this day, she's not the best mother. But I knew I loved my son, and I knew what kind of mother I wished I had, so I tried to be that for Paris, right? But things didn't magically get better. Our family was still dysfunctional. Our family is still dysfunctional, right? Every family is dysfunctional to a point. Things did not magically improve, right? I tried everything. I went to therapy, I stayed sober, and I wasn't sober, but it wasn't like before. I started, I became an adult, I got married twice, I ran our company, I started my own businesses, life went on, and I really thought that, I must have been naive. I thought that somehow Paris and Ella and I would escape all of that history, right? 6 months before Ella died, I had made a very major decision for my life, and I had cut my mother completely out of it because she was a very toxic part of, what went on in our family, and I didn't want that anymore for my kids, right? But you can't just make it all go away, right? And it affects us in ways that we don't even know, right? People, my background's in psychology and development and stuff, and so this whole nature nurture, and I'm like, I don't know. I see Paris, and I know that things weren't perfect, right? But I also know, the love that went in to that child, right? The sacrifices that I made. My entire identity was my children. They were everything. They got everything of me. And he still did what he did. And I can guarantee you, Paris himself was not a victim of sexual abuse, not a victim of physical abuse. He experienced those domestic violence issues vicariously through my mother, but I did a pretty good job of protecting him, I thought, there was nothing about his specific past other than where he came from. He was not a victim of anything himself other than being born into our family. But yet he still has turned into this person. Totally went off script. Everybody okay right now? Yeah, you good? Okay. So, why all the family history, right? We kind of touched upon this. Why am I getting so uncomfortably personal? Because trust me, it is not easy always to talk about these things, even after years. You guys are the very first group I've ever told that my brother asked me to give him blowjobs. I'm 43 years old and it's taken me that long to say it out loud today, right? People know just from, little asides or whatever, but very first time ever today that I've said, my brother did this to me. Right? So why do this? Why put myself up here and tell you these things about me? Because you don't get these pictures out of your head once they're there, right? Because in your line of work, these are the conversations you're going to have with people that you need to have with people all the time. Since Ella died, I have become a certified crisis interventionist, right? A mediator, a bunch of different, anger management trainer, like a whole bunch of different things, right? Qualifications. And you're going to hear all this stuff. You're going to see these things. You need to be able to hear them. You need to be able to talk about them, right? You have to be able to ask. I've had to ask a 4-year-old little girl, honey, show me where your father put his penis, please. I need to be clear on this. You're going to have these conversations. Or you're going to be reading about this stuff all the time if you go into academia or whatever, right? But the world that you're choosing to go into, we don't sit around a whole lot and talk about roses and flowers and sunshine. You occasionally get to hear a story about a caterpillar, but this is what you hear. All of this. So that's why. In order to get the information you need to solve a crime, or to help a victim come to terms with their own trauma, or, and this is really what I want you guys to focus on for what you do, for retaining your own humanity in this line of work. Because boy, I'm going to tell you, you can get jaded, and you can get cynical, and you're going to get burnt out. I took 7 months off about 4 months ago, because I was like, you know what, I care, but I don't have a damn thing left to give you. It will take it from you if you do not approach these things honestly and to always be seeking truth, okay? You've heard that cliche, that truth shall set you free, right? I don't know that I'd go so far as say that you become free of everything, but in situations like mine, whether it be the childhood sex abuse, or the murder of my father, or what Paris did to his sister Ella, the only thing that will help soothe pain is truth, right? Lies compound the problem. The only sliver of justice that you're going to see will come from the truth, right? Justice is a very elusive concept depending on how you choose to define it. But the closest that I've ever seen justice happen is when it was based on as much as the truth as possible. On April the 12th, which is my daughter's 15th birthday, I'm scheduled to be in Texas to witness the execution of an Ella client, a man that I have been working with through the bulletproof glass now for 5 years. He's going to die on my daughter's birthday, and I'm going to be there to witness for him because he asked me to be there. The truth is that family of that man that he helped murder, they don't want the death penalty. Are they getting justice on April the 12th? We're not going to have a discussion about the death penalty. I'm just saying that justice, as much as possible, needs to be predicated on the truth of the reality. Let me tell you a little bit about Paris. So you can try to figure him out, but you won't. Paris was a really good kid, right? A really good kid. Stephanie knew him. She can tell you. He was a great kid. He was sweet. He was loving. He was a pacifist, believe it or not. He was a great kid. He was an amazing big brother. And I will stand by that until the day I die, in spite of what he did to Ella that day. Until the day he murdered his sister, that boy was an amazing big brother. He helped take care of his sister. She worshiped him. He was her fashion consultant. She did not wear anything that had not been approved by him, right? So my daughter was going to school at 4 in Misfits t-shirts with striped leggings and lime green tutus. Like that, I don't know, you know, she worshiped him. He has an IQ of 142. Anybody know what average IQ is? Y'all gotta know what average IQ is. You're criminal justice students. Come on. What's the average IQ in America?
100.
Between 80 and 100. Right? Anything over 120 is considered above average, exceptional. Paris is 142. Making him very difficult to deal with. The way that I see it is, in some ways, Paris didn't stand a chance, right? He has this genetic makeup. He was a good kid, and then he started going through puberty, right? And all the experts in this topic tell me that what they think happened is, you know, going through the puberty, the hormonal changes are what triggered these more latent genetic things, the sociopathy, the narcissism, the sadism, right? Because I'm telling you, Paris wasn't raised to be that way. No, like, I talked to my kid about sex, but I didn't tell him things like, oh yeah, you want to see him suffer, baby. Like, you know, he was not the product of his environment. He's got to be genetics, right? But then there is an environment. Because obviously everything I went through informed and influenced my raising of him, right? But in some ways he didn't have a chance, okay? But in other ways, he could have made 1,000 other decisions that night. He has an IQ of 142. He's a smart kid. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did what he wanted, which was to kill somebody. Right? And so what do you do with somebody like Paris? I really firmly believe that under the right set of circumstances, i.e. stress, you know, have y'all heard the stress diathesis model? It's about the mental health model that states that people will exhibit increased symptomology under times of stress, right? Stress exacerbates symptoms, whether it be addiction or a mood disorder like depression or anxiety, or, you know, OCD is used to combat anxiety. Like, it's a result of stress. So is psychopathy. A person who is wired like my son, they get into the right situation and they feel frustrated, they lash out. I'm going to tell you about the day that Ella was murdered. All the stuff about our past, you know, how Paris was, all of that, it's all out there. Like, my life is an open book, seriously. You just put in the Ella Foundation in Google and you're going to know more about my life than you could ever possibly want to know. It's out there. But I'm going to tell you about the night that Ella died. Because these are the kinds of nights that if you go into law enforcement, you go into the legal field, things like that, these are the nights you're gonna see, right? And all of that history that I told you about in the past, this is what those officers walked into that night, right? The night that Ella died. All of that. So Ella died on February 4th, 2007. It had not been a good weekend. That stress was definitely there. I had, like I said, I had quit talking to my mother 6 months prior to the murder. And as a result of that, was about to file bankruptcy because she had all of my assets frozen, and we had moved out of like a house that I had built into this really small little house where we were kind of like on top of each other. I was in graduate school. I was working 2 jobs, right? I was a single parent. I had been sober for about a year because I had relapsed when Paris was 12 for about 4 months, right? So I'd been sober again for a year. And I knew that things were hard on all of us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt good about the future because it was one that I was going to create the way that I wanted for my kids. I was done with all this dysfunction. I wanted to have the most boring life possible, right? Like I was working on it. I was getting there. And I went to work. I was working as a bartender at Buffalo Wild Wings, and it was Super Bowl Sunday. I hate football now. And it was late, and I had been serving a woman who was there with her 11-year-old son, right? And I had cut her off because she was obviously needed to quit. And I called her, I talked her into giving me her telephone, and I called her parents to come and get her and her son, because she didn't need to be driving him. Didn't think another thing about her. And then I looked up at the door about midnight. And it is at this point that my memories of the events that happened are kind of more like my childhood memories, snapshots, right? I still have people come up to me now, 10 years later, and they're like, oh, do you remember? And I'm like, no. And there's this whole periods of time that are gone. So this is what I remember. I remember talking to a coworker, okay? She was feeling really discouraged about something, I can't remember. She was younger than me. I was in my 30s. I was 33 years old at this time. And I'm, telling her, like, it's gonna be okay, right? And she was like, how do you get through? Like, you're in grad school and you got kids, and like, how do you get through? And I said, this is how I cope with, the hard times. I get a picture in my mind's eye of what's really important to me, and in this case, it would be Paris and Ella. In fact, in all cases, it would be Paris and Ella. And I think about that, and I use that to keep me going, right? I do it because it's important to me. It's for my kids. So you find something that really means a lot to you, and you use it to get your strength and your motivation to keep going, right? Like, she's like, oh, thanks, man, and like got her all pepped up, okay? Then I remember the mom. And then I remember the cops. And I remember when I saw the cops, feeling just this slight moment of panic, right? Because I thought, oh my God, that woman drove home with her son anyway and got into a wreck and did something, hurt her child somehow, and they're coming to arrest me. Because in Texas, I don't know how it is here, but in Texas, if an intoxicated person, was involved in an accident or, vehicular manslaughter or whatever, the person serving them could be found criminally negligent. And I'm like, shit, I've got to get home to Paris and Ella. But I thought it was this woman. That's what it was. remember thinking how happy I was that Paris and Ella were safe at home and that I would soon be there. Just had to deal with whatever. Somebody let them in, okay? And I remember them walking back into my manager's office, and I remember all the girls, were cleaning up after Super Bowl Sunday, and everybody being like, oh, what do you think that's about? You think that woman really drove home with her son? And they're like, it's okay, Terry, it's fine, And then I remember the manager came out, and he wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look me in the eyes at all. And he said, come here. And I remember my feeling of panic increasing because I was like, oh shit. And I remember thinking, as long as I can go home to Paris and Ella, I'll deal with whatever comes the way, right? So the first thing they did was they took me inside and they asked me to sit down. Big mistake. At this point, I'm like a lioness who feels danger, right? And I know that I have to get home. And they're like, we need you to sit down. Something's happened. I wouldn't sit down. And the first thing they told me was that Ella had been hurt. Those of you that have kids, when you hear that your child's been hurt, what is the first thing you do? You bolt. You go to find your baby. Because if they're hurt, it's bad, but there's hope. And they need you, right? Because that's your baby. So I thought Ella was hurt. So I'm like, I gotta go. Tell me where she is. Where is she? What hospital is she in? Tell me where she is. No, it's not like that. What do you mean it's not like that? Ella's dead. What? Hurt? How does hurt go to dead? Right? A little note for those of you that ever have to do death notifications, because I've done them. Never tell a parent their child is hurt. When you do a death notification, you say, I am so sorry. They are dead. Because when you say hurt, or you say anything besides dead, what are you giving that person? Hope. You're taking it away when you say dead. So they really messed that up. I fainted. I've never fainted in my life, and I fainted. Your brain just can't handle that kind of information. And then I came to, and I tried to bolt again. They really wanted to keep me in this room, and I really wanted to get out of this damn room. Because I didn't believe them. Somewhere in my unconscious state, I decided that these cops were full of shit. They didn't know what the hell they were talking about, right? And so I just started screaming at them, you're lying. Quit lying to me. Let go of me. Let me go. I need to get my daughter. Let me go. And they said, wait, there's more. More? And I said, your son. And oh my gosh, I remembered I had a son. I'm like, where's my son? Where's my son? Where's Paris? Is he okay? Did somebody hurt him too? Is he alive? Is he still here? No, he's in jail. What? What? He's 13 and he's in jail. Why did you take him to jail? What did you mean, he killed her. What? I can't even begin to explain to you what that feels like. Obviously, it's been 10 years. I can talk about everything, but when I talk about that moment, that very first moment, when I heard that not only was my baby dead, but she had been murdered, but I also heard that my other baby, who saved my life, did it. He did it. My brain fried. Everything that I thought about anything didn't matter anymore, and it didn't make sense. The world was not the world that I knew. This was an event, and for those of you that go into law enforcement, you need to remember this. You're going to be dealing with people who were like me, and you can imagine if I'm like this 10 years later, what I was like that day, that night, that year after Ella died. This is an event that no one's brain can ever anticipate. I have talked to people who have lived in situations that are even more dysfunctional than mine, where there's ongoing sex abuse, open drug abuse, domestic violence, like the worst of the worst of the worst, and we still as human beings think that something like this could never happen. We don't see it as the logical conclusion to a lifetime of dysfunction. We see it as a rarity, right? That's why we're so amazed, or not amazed, but when it happens, we're all just like, what? My brain did not anticipate it, and it had no way of processing it. Therefore, it means my brain literally shorted out. I have a very clear memory of my world, it didn't faint again, but of my world going black, like out of focus, and then it all coming back, and the world feeling surreal. Like nothing made sense. My heart shattered into a billion pieces. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. I didn't think I would ever be put back together, because these kids were my life, and they were gone. Just like that. In the 20 minutes it took Ella Paris to destroy his sister, he destroyed my entire world. My identity, everything I thought made sense, everything I thought I knew about parenting and psychology and all of these things, it was gone. Just like my mom and dad, all over again. So even though I didn't put two and two together on that night, 10 years later, you know, people who do not deal with trauma continuously re-experience it. In fact, we will go out of our way to recreate situations that are familiar to us, because we'd rather be in a comfortable situation that is dysfunctional than in something that we know nothing about. We know how to navigate trauma, right? So people will recreate it. But it was like my parents all over again. One day, I had a family, and the next day I didn't. Because of murder. Because of a loved one killing a loved one. I think my mom had something to do with my dad dying. I'll just fill y'all in on all that now, but it was just history repeating itself. Which is what violence does, right? It repeats itself over and over and over. Violence begets violence. I functioned that night. I did. Not that well, but I functioned. For 6 hours, I sat in front of my house in 20-degree weather, surrounded by media. They were there before I was. They knew my daughter was dead before I did. right? And were there waiting on me. I was out of my mind. And the cops, just gonna say it, they were assholes. Every time I asked them a question, what's going on? Can I see my baby? Where is my son? Take me to my son. It was, you're not in a position to be calling the shots here, are you, Missy? You should have thought of that before you raised that boy the way you did. You just need to sit your ass down, Missy, and get in that car. You don't like the cameras in your face, Missy? Sorry. Should have been a better mother. From the get-go, law enforcement had it pegged that it was my fault that Paris did what he did. How many of you like to read history? How many of you like World War II history? How many of you like Nazi history? How many of you have books about the Holocaust in your house? Don't ever kill anybody. They'll think you're evil. They paraded all of my Holocaust books and said that because I studied the Holocaust, my son obviously was messed up. Yes, because I raised my child to be the next Hitler. You know, it was a history book. But everything changes. The perspective changes once the violence happens. 6 hours I was out there dealing with that all by myself. Nobody was there. They had a chaplain, and she helped as she could, but not very much. Finally, as dawn was breaking, so all the world could see, and trust me, all the world was out there to see this. Ella was finally wheeled out of our house. She was in a black body bag that was zipped up to her neck. I found out later, this is not protocol, right? But the chaplain had convinced the lead detectives that for my own sanity, I needed to see that my daughter was really dead. So they brought her outside. I immediately took off running to Ella. I lost my hearing. I literally could not hear what was happening around me. I saw people yelling at me. I felt people trying to pull me off, but all I could see was Ella. I did everything I could to touch her, to feel her. You know, I told you Paris beat her, and so she had contusions all over her face, and she had blood coming out of her mouth, which was dried, and she was obviously not there anymore. She was really dead. I kissed her, even though they were trying to pull me off of her. I kept kissing her, and I kept telling her, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. And then I think I begged her over and over not to leave me. Please don't leave me. And then, and then they took her. And I remember collapsing in my front yard when they put her in the hearse. And I went inside, and my hearing came back. I quit fighting, and I think I just had it. I went inside, and I sat down on my couch, and my brain just shut off.
I realized that day, that morning, that life was never going to be the same again. That I could not rebuild what I had had like I had done so many times before. And that both of my children were gone. Gone. That was around 6:30 in the morning. At 9:30, I was sitting in the office of a criminal defense attorney. Because I was not just the mother of a murder victim, I was the mother of a murderer. And while I believe to this day that people like Paris that commit these violent crimes must be held accountable, I also believe that they deserve and have a right to an advocate of their own, right? Paris was a child. He was 13 years old. He needed help. So I hired him, a criminal defense attorney. The first thing this man told me, 3 hours after kissing Ella's dead face, was that Texas would execute my son. It took him about 5 minutes and me going over and over again, but he's only 13. He's only 13. For him to go, oh, my bad, I forgot. We changed the law 2 years ago. You can't execute anybody under the age of 18 now. But you could have if it had been 2005. At 5:30 that day, I saw my son for the first time, right? The last time I saw my son, he was angry with me because of an allowance thing. And the very last thing I ever said to Paris before I saw him in prison that day as I left for work is, I walked over to my son, who was as tall as me at that time, and I gave him a really big hug, and I said, I know you're mad at me, Paris, but it's gonna be okay. We'll work it out, right? We'll talk some more when I get home from work. He goes to his sister, I see him again at 5:30. My brain exploded even more. That sounds terrible, but I mean, I really don't know how to describe it, right? Like, the very first time I walked in there, Paris was sitting in a chair in the corner, and he was like way in the corner, right? And he kind of had that protective, stance you get, just the body language was very protective. Told me later he was really scared of what I was going to do, but in my mind, there was no question of what I was going to do. That was my baby. I hadn't seen him. Nobody would take me to him. The cops would not bring me to him, even though he was only 13. He had just murdered somebody. I needed to know he was okay, right? So I walk in that room, and I'm crying, because I cried for about a year. And I walk over to my son, and I grab him, and I pull him out of the chair, and I hug him. And I said, I'm so happy to see you. Happy you're okay. And I hugged, and I hugged, and I hugged. And then I realized he's not hugging me back. And then I realized, wow, he's really tense. Like,
super, like, he was holding himself very, very rigid. And I was like, I let go, and I step back, and he looks at me and he says, "What are you gonna do now, Mom?" Just like that. No emotion, no tears. He wasn't shaking, nothing. He was fine. And he said, "What are you gonna do now, Mom?" And I said, "What do you mean, what am I gonna do now?" He said, "Well," he said, "you always said the only way you would ever hurt somebody is if they hurt one of your kids. So what are you gonna do now? Because it's one of your kids." And I just told him, I said, "I don't know, Paris. I'm gonna do what I promised to do when I had you. I'm gonna be the best mom I know to be and love you no matter what." It was like this promise that I had made to Paris. That day I held him in my arms. I don't know how to be a real mom, but I'm gonna be the best mom I can, and I'm gonna love him. And so that's what I told him that I would do. Paris laughed at me. And this is the very first time that I realized he's not right. He's not right. He laughed at me. I mean, here I am, falling apart, you know, hiring attorneys, dealing with media, trying to get my head around this idea, planning a 4-year-old girl's funeral. And he feels nothing. And he laughs, and he says, "You know," he goes, "y'all are all so fucking stupid." And I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "You're all so fucking stupid. You have thought all this time that I am handsome and smart and charming and all these things." He goes, "But you had no idea who I really was." Long story short, Paris spent the next 6 years fully exploring his sociopathic personality and taking it out on his mother. People ask me all the time, "Why did you stand by your son?" And you know, I would like to say that, because I love him, and I do. I love my son. I love my son just as fiercely now as I did on the day that he was given to me, right? You do not go to bat for a boy like my son as much as I have if you do not love this person, okay? Most of the time, I do not like my son. Have any of you ever met a sociopath? Have any of you ever met somebody that has narcissistic personality disorder? Yeah, I get more yeses on those. They're assholes, right? Like, they're not likable. There are times I'm across from my child and I'm like, but it's not about Paris. It's about me. I started the Ella Foundation because there had to be something meaningful, right? This is why something good has to come out of violence. If I hadn't started the foundation, if I hadn't advocated for other families in the juvenile system, if I don't witness this execution because this man wants somebody there who he knows looks at him with no judgment on the day that he dies, if I don't tell this story over and over to anybody that will listen, then none of it meant anything. It's just violence, right? You're never going to eradicate violence, okay? When you're young,
I remember I was gonna like revolutionize psychology one day or something, you know, when I was young. But you're never gonna eradicate it. It's gonna be there. You can mitigate it. You can help prevent it, right? You can certainly do things to help people after the fact, but it's always gonna be there. If you don't do something with all the violence that either happens to you or happens to the people around you, it's meaningless. It's nothing. It's just tragedy. And then if that's the case, what's the point? Then you're 19-year-old me, and you're like, life is nothing but ugly. Why should I even care? Why should I even help? You have to let something good come from it. I don't know why we suffer. I have chosen to believe that suffering is here to make us grow and to make us make the world a better place, right? If Ella had just died and I hadn't done any of what I've done, then the only legacy that would be left of my family is a legacy of violence and murder and addiction and trauma and mental health issues. But I started Ella because I made a promise to her on the day that she died. I promised her that I would make it meaningful. My kids were not going to have been for nothing. Paris, in spite of the fact that he is a definite psychopath and narcissist and sadist, has taught me personally more about love and sacrifice and empathy than anybody ever has. Right? It is in these situations that you will find your humanity. And it is in these situations that you will remember that the people you're dealing with are human. If you ever walked into a situation like mine, you're gonna walk into, especially for those of you going into actual law enforcement, where you're going to be at crime scenes, you're going to walk into this. The lead detective on Paris's case resigned. He was so disturbed by my son's behavior and his apparent lack of care or concern. He quit. He said, I'm done. If this is what kids are turning into, I'm done, right? The officers that discovered Ella's body and processed the crime scene had to go to therapy for months. The police and I finally did start getting along. They apologized to me after a while when they realized, you know, who I was and what had happened. But it affects them. It will affect you. The guards in the prisons where my son is and all of the clients that I work with, they're affected by their jobs. You know, I do a lot of advocacy work on, like I said, on both sides. And I have a lot of colleagues who, they have nothing good to say about you guys going into criminal justice and law enforcement, and, you know, you guys are like the enemy, the evil ones. I don't subscribe to that. I see what it does to the people working in these facilities. You know, it changes you. You can't see this type of situation and not be affected by it. But it's your choice, how are you going to let it affect you? My reaction was to come up with Ella. Empathy, love, lessons, and action. This is the model that all the work that I do is based on, right? When I decided to start my own foundation, I was like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I was like, I need something. I need like something to organize it all, right? Because there's a lot of stuff. And so I'm sitting in my car, driving along, smelling the leather, and, you know, it hit me. Ella,
empathy, love, lessons, action, and it works. And in my view, these are the 4 things that those of us who are affected by violence need, right? So whether you're a victim, a criminal, an enforcement agent, like whatever, if you're dealing in the realm of violence, I think we could all benefit from Ella. Empathy, you will not be good at your job if you cannot be empathetic. People talk to me. People tell me all kinds of stuff. I can be sitting in the checkout line at the grocery store and start talking to somebody, and within 10 minutes, I know that they were raped at 3 and shot by a cop at 16. This really happened, that's why I've got this weird example. Right? Because I talk to people. And because somehow, because I've gone through everything I've gone through, I'm able to project to somebody that I am somebody who understands. Right? Now, to be empathetic does not mean that you have to have gone through all of this terrible stuff yourself. I'm not advocating if you've never been sexually abused to go get sexually abused. All it means is you have to remember what it's like to be human. Because what is at the bottom of all of these situations? Feelings. And when violence happens, the overwhelming feelings are powerlessness and lack of control. And all of you at some point have known what that feels like, right? You have to be able to empathize, whether it be with the victim, with the person you are trying to investigate, trying to prosecute, trying to arrest. You have to empathize. That does not mean condone. If you want them to talk to you, and you will want them to talk to you, they have to feel that you have some knowledge or awareness of their world. The unconditional love, the love part of it, again, I'm not so liberal that I'm like, oh, you just love everybody back to hell. That is so not gonna happen. I have spent so much time in prisons, and I can love somebody to death and they're still, have issues. What that concept is merely this. It can be summed up in this way. You judge an act. You never judge a person. Ever. When I walked in here and you first saw me, did you think I was going to tell you this story? Unless you had, assuming you did not go Google. You don't know. You don't know the story that made the person. You can condemn the act without condemning the person. You must not ever lose sight of your humanity. I can go into any prison and find you 10 guards and 10 inmates, and if you start hearing their stories, it's the exact same. Except one person went one way and one person went another, right? You judge the act, never the person. And if you ever start thinking that people are irredeemable or worthless or just pieces of shit that you can lock away and throw away the key, then you need to find a new line of work. Because believe it or not, you guys are the ones going into this, and I'm assuming that you have some desire to make things better, right? Everybody that I work with in criminal justice, they're like me. They want to see things get better. But there is that element out there that they get jaded, they get cynical. And if you get there, leave. The education, the lessons, empathy, love, lessons, action. Lessons, all about exactly what it says. A little education goes a long way. The majority of people that I've worked with, whether they be at the misdemeanor level or they've progressed on to felony or, worse than felony, morally maybe, not all of them. We want to say, oh, well, they made a bad choice. Or, oh, they should have made a better choice. But when you grow up in a world where nobody ever taught you how to make good choices, or all the choices that you had to make where I'm gonna choose between what's behind shitty door A and shitty door B, right? Then it warps your ability to make decisions. I went to Uganda fully expecting to be appalled by the prison system, right? Uganda, third world country, obviously these prisons are gonna be so much worse than American prisons, and they can be pretty bad. I walked away from that country thoroughly impressed, going, oh my God, we should all be like Ugandans. Because the warden, they don't call him that, but the warden of this unit told me there were no guns, there was hardly any guards, there was no riot gear, there were no cells, there were no locks except on the outside perimeter fence, right? And these were like guys on death row. I bet an Al-Shabaab terrorist. I was like, oh, what are you here for? Oh, I'm a member of Al-Shabaab. Like, you know, people that did some really bad things, but it wasn't like here. And so I asked the guy, I said, how do you do this? Because he's like, let's go take a tour. And he walked me out onto the yard of general population. How many of you have been in general population prisons? Yes. How many of you have ever seen a girl just walking around in general population, just woo-hoo for the fun of it? Never. It does not happen here. If I had walked into a prison in Texas, general population that had no guards, no inmate, or no guards, no weapons, I don't think it would have gone well, right? But it's like, whatever, we played soccer. And the reason is because they have a totally different mentality. Their belief is that the majority of these people, and even he admitted that there are some people that we just have no explanation for, like Paris, they need to be reparented. Okay? I had a little issue with the term reparenting because that implies that it's all parents' fault, and we're all, you know, obviously I'm a little touchy about that topic. But I liked the concept. Basically, their concept was the decision-making skills they have are subpar. They're not good decision-making skills, right? The context that they have to make decisions is not a full context. They don't know different. I had a 15-year-old girl who was amazed that I'd never been hit by a man, because in his world, in her world, that's how your boyfriend told you he loved you. He hit you, right? She thought I'd never been loved because I'd never been hit. She was sad for me. Well, I'm sad for her that she thought that way. So education, re-education. You will be surprised how if when the person is at the right spot mentally, that a little education can really go a long way. If you're dealing with a client in grief, knowing more about grief helps. If you're dealing with a son who all of a sudden is a sociopath, reading all available research on sociopathy helps. It helped me forgive my son. How do I stay mad at somebody who is wired to be a predator? It would be like being mad at his father because he's schizophrenic. Damn you for being schizophrenic. Do we get mad at people when they have schizophrenia? Not typically. We feel sorry for them, right? We want to help them. Some people might want to stay away because they act so weird. But we don't condemn them. Paris has a mental health disorder, right? But education helped. It goes a long way in helping you do your job better, and helping you process what comes up in you because of your job, and in helping those around you. A little education goes a very long way. Even if it's something just as simple as telling somebody, it's okay if you cry all the time. You're not going to cry forever. That's an education. Because they might feel like they're going to cry forever. Right? And then action. To me, the action is the most important outcome for people who have experienced violence and trauma. The biggest thing that violence does to you is it makes you feel powerless, right? And it makes you feel like you're out of control. It makes you feel like you have no say-so in your own world.
And so, when you are able to get a client to the point to where they were barely functioning or functioning in a very unhealthy or self-destructive way, and you can move them to, help them move to a point to where they are acting as an advocate for themselves, or they're starting a foundation, or they're, getting a petition organized, or, let me think of some examples from y'all's point of view. Say, God forbid, this should ever happen, you're, shot in the line of duty, right? And it really, really does a number on you. Cause just because you're a cop, doesn't mean you won't get PTSD or anything like that, right? You're probably more likely to have it. You will have to come to a point where, and say you're absolutely terrified to go back to work or hold a gun to them. You will have to go through this phase. You will have to have somebody that is empathetic and understands that feeling. You will have to have somebody who is not going to judge you because you're a cop who refuses to pick up your gun, right? That's like, it's a thing with cops. You gotta be able to pick up your gun. You need that person. You need some lessons on, okay, this is why you're feeling this way. This is what PTSD is. This is what your trigger points are. Maybe we can minimize your symptoms if we avoid these triggers or help you cope with these triggers, things like that. Maybe trigger shouldn't have been a good word. And then the last thing, you will know that that officer has been able to come through when you see them acting in a way that is beneficial. They will be able to go back to work. But say now they also go back to work and they start a fund for other officers who have been shot in the line of duty. Because now they know what it feels like, right? Now they're more empathetic. Because of their own experience of violence, they have become more empathetic. They have become more understanding. They have become the person who is now able to be the non-judgmental person for somebody else the next time somebody gets shot in the line of duty, right? They then become the person who can help educate. Maybe they decide to go teach a class on gun safety, or I don't know, they're giving it back. You will know that you personally, or the people that you're working with, have finally turned this corner when they're able to act. And if you're dealing with people who have been affected by violence, even if your job is law enforcement or legal or whatever, you're really in a position to be the most effective helpers of people. Because once violence has happened, 9 times out of 10, or maybe 6 times out of 10, depending on the state you're in, you're gonna be the one that has them, right? Harris has been incarcerated since he was 13 years old. He will not be released from prison until he's in his 40s or 50s. My child will have grown up in jail, prison. Who got to raise him? Or your counterparts, right? Who is creating the environment he lives in now? You guys, or your counterparts. You have more influence over the outcomes of these situations than you think, right? And the situation and the outcome will always be better than what it was when you walked into it, if you just remember Ella. You have empathy, you have unconditional love and positive regard for your fellow human beings. you are very serious about your education and helping others get theirs, and you act. You don't just sit on your ass and watch, you act. Because the places that you guys are gonna be going to work, they're just as corrupt as all the drug dens and all the crack houses and everything else. I could sit here and give you a whole nother lecture on what life is like, just as on the mother of the murderer side. You know, where my son is incarcerated now, let's see, in the past 6 months, there's been 3 murders, 1 stabbing, 1 beating, and 1 strangulation. There is a huge population of inmates who are totally losing their mind on synthetic marijuana, K2, who brings that in? Guards. That's not something that families can smuggle in as easily. The majority of contraband in the prisons comes from guards. The phones, the heroin, the cocaine, the K2, the pills. There's fight clubs, right? The unit that my son is at used to be called the Gladiator Unit because the guards organized fight clubs with the inmates, right? Pretty common event. I'm gonna tell you this story. My son called home one time and asked me for $300. I'm like, why? You're in prison? He said, well, you know, Mom, I was 13 when I went to prison. I was like, yeah, I know. And he's like, I never lost my virginity. I'm like, sorry, too bad for you. You know, not my problem, kid. And I'm like, I don't understand how the two are related. And he's like, well, if you send me $300, there's a guard in here who will have sex with me. So there's prostitution. I was like, okay, listen, I love you, but this is one of those places where I draw the line, right? So there's prostitution. There's all kinds of things. And so you will have opportunities every day to act, right? You can either add to the violence, because violence begets violence, and prisons are very violent places, or you can do the opposite. You can do whatever you can to make it better. Because every single one of those people that you're going to encounter from the law enforcement, criminal justice side of the equation is somebody's kid. There's somebody's son, there's somebody's baby, somebody's husband, father. They're a human being. And we all have to go out of our way to treat each other well. So things like what happened in my family don't continue to happen.